The battering ram splintered the front door of Mercy Community Clinic at exactly 6:47 a.m., sending shards of wood and glass cascading across the sterile waiting room floor. Dr. Marcus Brown, who had been reviewing patient charts in his office since dawn, felt his coffee mug slip from his hands as the thunderous crash echoed through the building. The ceramic shattered against the hardwood, dark liquid spreading like blood across medical journals scattered on his desk. Hands up now. The voices were harsh, militaristic, cutting through the morning silence like blades. Heavy boots pounded against linoleum as tactical officers stormed through the clinic's hallways, automatic weapons drawn, their black uniforms and helmets making them appear more like invaders than protectors. Dr. Brown's hands shot skyward instinctively, his 62-year-old frame trembling as adrenaline flooded his system. "I'm a doctor," he called out, his voice steady despite the chaos. "This is a medical clinic. There are patients here." The lead officer, his face hidden behind tactical goggles, grabbed Dr. Brown's shoulder roughly and spun him around. Cold metal handcuffs bit into his wrists as they were yanked behind his back. The officer's breath was hot against his ear as he spoke. "We got reports of drug dealing. You're under arrest." In the waiting room, elderly Mrs. Chen clutched her medication bottles to her chest, her arthritis-gnarled fingers white with terror. Her grandson had driven her here for her weekly blood pressure check, the same appointment she'd kept religiously for the past 3 years. Now she watched in horror as officers threw chairs aside, their boots crushing the children's toys she had donated just last month. "Please," she whispered in accented English. "Doctor is good man. Doctor helps us." Nobody listened. Nurse Patricia Williams, a 45-year-old single mother who had worked beside Dr. Brown for 8 years, emerged from the supply closet with her arms full of gauze and antibiotics. The sight that greeted her defied comprehension. Officers were rifling through medicine cabinets, dumping prescription bottles onto examination tables, their contents scattering like confetti. The careful organization she maintained, the system that kept track of every dose of insulin and blood pressure medication for their diabetic and hypertensive patients, was being destroyed with methodical efficiency. "What's happening?" Patricia's voice cracked as she set down the supplies with shaking hands. "Where's Dr. Brown?" An officer approached her, his weapon still drawn, though pointed downward. "You work here." "I'm a registered nurse. This is my workplace. These are our patients." Patricia gestured toward the waiting room where a dozen community members sat frozen in fear. "We're a community health clinic. We serve low-income families." "Turn around, hands behind your back." The handcuffs were tighter on Patricia than they needed to be, as metal cut into her wrists. She thought about her son Marcus, named after Dr. Brown, who would be getting ready for school right now. She thought about the scholarship fund Dr. Brown had helped establish for kids like Marcus, and about the free clinics they ran every Saturday for families who couldn't afford healthcare anywhere else. Dr. Brown was forced to his knees in the center of his own clinic, surrounded by the chaos of his life's work being torn apart. Prescription pads were scattered across the floor, patient files dumped from cabinets, medical equipment pushed aside carelessly. A framed photograph of his late wife, Dr. Sarah Brown, who had helped him establish the clinic 15 years ago, lay face down in a puddle of spilled saline solution. "This is wrong," he said quietly, his voice carrying the weight of decades spent healing rather than harming. "We serve this community. Check our records. Call the medical board. I've been practicing medicine for 37 years without a single complaint." The lead officer's radio crackled with static. "Control, this is Alpha Team. We've secured the location. Multiple suspects in custody. Suspects. The word hit Dr. Brown like a physical blow. In all his years of service, through medical school at Howard University, his residency in inner-city Detroit, and his decision to establish a practice in one of the most underserved neighborhoods in the state, he had never been called anything but doctor by those who knew him. Through the shattered front door, Dr. Brown could see a crowd gathering on the sidewalk. News vans were already arriving, their satellite dishes extending like metallic flowers seeking sun. Cell phone cameras flashed as neighbors and patients who had come for morning appointments stood behind yellow tape. Confusion and fear etched across their faces. Mrs. Rodriguez, whose diabetes Dr. Brown had been managing for 5 years, pressed against the police barricade. "Let me talk to him," she shouted. "He's my doctor. He saved my life." Officer Johnson, a younger member of the tactical team, shifted uncomfortably as he watched the crowd grow. This wasn't what he had expected when the call came in. Drug raids usually involved abandoned buildings or known crack houses, not clean medical facilities with framed diplomas and patient appreciation letters covering the walls. "Sergeant," he said quietly to the lead officer, "maybe we should verify the complaint before—" "The call came in this morning." The sergeant cut him off. "Anonymous tip. Said there was drug dealing going on here. Patients coming and going at all hours. We do our job, Johnson. Let the detectives sort out the details." But as Officer Johnson looked around the clinic, noting the medical equipment, the patient education posters in both English and Spanish, the children's corner with books and toys, doubt crept into his mind. His own grandmother had used a clinic like this before Medicare kicked in. He remembered the gentle way those doctors had treated her, never making her feel ashamed for needing charity care. Dr. Brown's knees began to ache against the hard floor, but he remained silent, his mind racing through possibilities. Who would call in such a report in 15 years of practice? He had built relationships throughout the community. He knew his patients' children by name, had attended their graduations, had worked with social services to connect families with resources beyond medical care. The answer came in the form of clicking high heels across broken glass. Karen Mitchell, a 52-year-old real estate developer with perfectly styled blonde hair and a face that rarely displayed anything but calculated confidence, stepped through the destroyed doorway as if she owned the place. She wore a cream-colored business suit that probably cost more than most of Dr. Brown's patients earned in a month, and her designer handbag was clutched tightly in her manicured fingers. "Thank God you're here," she said to the lead officer, her voice pitched perfectly to convey both relief and righteous indignation. "I've been trying to get someone to investigate this place for months." Dr. Brown's head snapped up at the sound of her voice. Recognition flooded through him, followed immediately by a sick understanding that began to form in the pit of his stomach. Karen Mitchell, the woman who had stormed into his office 3 months ago, demanding special treatment for a routine procedure, insisting that her insurance should cover experimental treatments that weren't medically necessary. "You know this woman, Doc?" Patricia asked quietly from where she knelt nearby, still handcuffed. Dr. Brown nodded slowly. "She was a patient. Former patient." Karen's voice carried clearly across the clinic as she spoke with the officers. "The traffic in and out of here is constant. People coming at all hours, staying for just a few minutes. Cash transactions. It's obviously a drug operation disguised as a medical clinic." Officer Johnson found himself studying Karen's face, noting the way her eyes avoided direct contact with Dr. Brown, the slight flush in her cheeks that suggested nervousness beneath her confident exterior. "Ma'am," Did you witness actual drug transactions? I saw what I saw, Karen replied curtly. People don't need medical treatment at 6 in the morning unless something suspicious is happening. Actually, Patricia spoke up, her nurse's training overriding her fear. We open early because many of our patients work multiple jobs. They come before their shifts start or after night shifts end. We accommodate their schedules because they can't afford to lose wages for medical appointments during business hours. Karen's jaw tightened. Are you going to believe a drug dealer or a concerned citizen? The words hung in the air like poison gas. Drug dealer. Doctor. Brown felt something break inside his chest. A lifetime of dedication and service crumbling under the weight of false accusations. He thought of his late wife Sarah. How proud she had been when they opened the clinic together. How she had believed they were making a real difference in the world. I want to see your badge numbers. Doctor, Brown said suddenly, his voice carrying new strength. All of you. This is a wrongful arrest, and I want documentation of every officer involved. The sergeant's radio crackled again. Alpha Team, what's your status? Media's gathering outside. Through the windows. Doctor, Brown could see the crowd had grown larger. Local news crews had arrived, their reporters doing stand-ups with the destroyed clinic in the background. Cell phone videos were being live-streamed to Facebook and Instagram, the footage spreading across social media platforms faster than the officers could control the scene. Mrs. Chen had called her granddaughter, who worked at the local newspaper. Within minutes, the story was being shared in community Facebook groups, church phone trees, and neighborhood WhatsApp chats. Doctor, Brown arrested at clinic, became Police Raid Community Health Center, became SWAT team attacks, Black Doctors Clinic, as the story evolved with each retelling. Detective Maria Santos arrived on scene 30 minutes after the initial breach, her unmarked sedan cutting through the crowd of onlookers and media personnel. As a 20-year veteran of the force, she had seen enough drug raids to know what they typically looked like, and this scene troubled her immediately. The clinic was too clean, too organized, too obviously legitimate to match the complaint that had triggered the operation. Who called this in? She asked the sergeant as she surveyed the damage. Anonymous tip this morning around 6. Female caller. Said she'd observed drug dealing activity over several weeks. Gave specific details about timing and foot traffic patterns. Detective Santos frowned. Anonymous tips were often unreliable, driven by personal grudges or mental health issues rather than actual criminal activity. Standard protocol called for surveillance and investigation before executing such an aggressive response, especially against a licensed medical facility. Did we verify the caller's information? Run background checks on the business? The sergeant's hesitation told her everything she needed to know. The call came in during shift change. Command decided to move quickly based on the specific nature of the allegations. Detective Santos pulled out her phone and ran a quick search on Dr. Marcus Brown and Mercy Community Clinic. What she found made her stomach drop. Award recipient from the State Medical Association for Community Service. Featured in the local newspaper twice in the past year for his work providing free health care to homeless veterans. Board certified in family medicine with no disciplinary actions on his record. 0 complaints filed with the Medical Licensing Board. She looked at Karen Mitchell, who was still speaking with officers near the front door. Her voice animated as she described her observations of suspicious activity. Something about the woman's body language, the way she kept glancing at Dr. Brown with what looked more like satisfaction than concern, triggered the detective's instincts. Ma'am. Detective Santos approached Karen with her badge displayed. I'm Detective Santos. I understand you're the person who reported this activity. Karen's posture stiffened slightly. Yes, I felt it was my civic duty to report what I observed. And you observed this from where exactly? I, I drive by here frequently. For work. I'm in real estate development. Detective Santos made a note in her book. What company? Mitchell Development Group. We specialize in commercial properties in transitioning neighborhoods. The phrase transitioning neighborhoods was real estate code for gentrification, and Detective Santos had seen this pattern before. Established community institutions, especially those serving low-income populations, were often viewed as obstacles to development plans that would bring in higher-income residents and businesses. Have you had any personal interactions with Dr. Brown or his staff? Karen's pause was barely perceptible, but Detective Santos caught it. I may have visited the clinic once. For a minor issue. What kind of issue? I don't see how that's relevant. Detective Santos continued taking notes, her experienced eyes cataloging Karen's defensive posture, the way her hands tightened around her purse strap, the slight elevation in her voice pitch that often accompanied deception. After 2 decades of investigations, she had learned to trust her instincts, and every instinct was telling her that this woman was not being truthful. Meanwhile, Dr. Brown remained on his knees in the center of his destroyed clinic, watching his life's work being dismantled by people who had never bothered to understand what he was trying to accomplish. The irony was not lost on him that he was being treated as a criminal in the same building where he had provided free medical care to police officers' family members, where he had treated their children's ear infections and their parents' blood pressure without ever asking about their ability to pay. Officer Johnson approached Detective Santos quietly. Ma'am, I think we might have a problem here. I've been looking through the clinic's records while the team searched, and everything appears legitimate. Schedule books, patient files, prescription logs, it all checks out. Even their controlled substance inventory is properly documented and matches state requirements. Detective Santos nodded grimly. How long ago did we breach the building? About 45 minutes. And in that time, have we found any evidence of drug dealing? Any illegal substances that aren't properly prescribed and documented? Officer Johnson shook his head. Nothing. Ma'am, if anything, their record-keeping is better than some hospitals I've seen. The detective looked around the clinic again, noting the family photos on Dr. Brown's desk, the thank you cards from patients taped to the walls, the children's drawings that had been torn down during the search. This was not the office of a drug dealer. This was the workspace of a man who had dedicated his life to healing others. Sergeant, she called out, her voice carrying the authority of rank and experience. I need those handcuffs removed from Dr. Brown and his staff immediately. Detective, we haven't finished processing the scene. Remove the handcuffs, now. The metal restraints fell away from Dr. Brown's wrists, leaving red marks on his dark skin where they had cut into his flesh. He rubbed his hands together slowly, working circulation back into his fingers while processing the humiliation of the past hour. Around him, his staff was also being released, their faces showing a mixture of relief and lingering fear. Patricia immediately went to Mrs. Chen, who had been crying quietly in her chair throughout the ordeal. The elderly woman's medication had been scattered across the floor during the search, her blood pressure pills mixed with broken glass and debris. It's okay, Patricia whispered, her voice gentle despite her own trauma. We're going to take care of you. Let me check your blood pressure and make sure you're all right. Dr. Brown stood slowly, his knees protesting after the extended time on the hard floor. He looked around at the destruction of his clinic, at the scattered patient files and overturned furniture, at the medical equipment that would need to be recalibrated after being roughly handled. The financial cost of repairing the damage would be significant, but the emotional cost was immeasurable. Detective Santos. Doctor. Brown's voice was quiet, but steady. I want to know who made this complaint. I have a right to face my accuser. Detective Santos glanced at Karen Mitchell, who had moved toward the door as if preparing to leave now that her work was done. Ma'am, I'm going to need you to stay a bit longer. I have some additional questions. Karen's perfectly composed facade began to crack slightly. I really should be going. I have a business meeting. This won't take long. Officer Johnson, could you please keep Ms. Mitchell company while I speak with Dr. Brown? The detective led Dr. Brown to his office, noting how he carefully picked up the photograph of his late wife and set it upright on his desk, brushing glass fragments away from the frame with tender fingers. Doctor, I need you to tell me everything you know about Karen Mitchell. Dr. Brown settled into his chair, the familiar weight of his stethoscope around his neck providing some comfort despite the chaos surrounding them. She came to the clinic 3 months ago as a new patient, said she was having persistent headaches, and wanted a full neurological workup, including an MRI and CT scan. Did her symptoms warrant those tests? Not based on her presentation and history. She had classic tension headaches, likely stress-related. I recommended lifestyle modifications, stress management, and over-the-counter pain relievers as a first-line treatment. I explained that expensive imaging studies weren't indicated unless conservative treatment failed. Detective Santos took notes as Dr. Brown continued. She became very agitated when I wouldn't order the tests immediately. She said she knew I could work the system to get her insurance to pay for whatever she wanted. When I explained that I couldn't order medically unnecessary procedures, she accused me of providing substandard care because she wasn't a charity case like my other patients. How did the appointment end? She demanded a referral to a specialist. I provided one, as requested. She left angry, saying she would make sure everyone knew what kind of doctor I really was. I thought she meant online reviews. Maybe a complaint to the medical board? I never imagined something like this. Detective Santos closed her notebook and looked directly at Dr. Brown. Doctor, I believe you've been the victim of a false police report, motivated by personal revenge. I'm going to need you to document everything about your interaction with Ms. Mitchell, and I'm going to need your staff to do the same. Through the office window, they could see Karen Mitchell pacing near the front door, her cell phone pressed to her ear. Her voice was too distant to hear clearly, but her body language suggested an increasingly frantic conversation with whoever was on the other end of the line. Outside on the street, the crowd had grown to nearly 100 people. Dr. Brown's patients had been joined by community activists, local clergy, and residents who had heard about the raid through social media. Someone had brought a portable speaker, and the crowd was singing, "We Shall Overcome," while holding handmade signs reading, "Justice for Dr. Brown," and "Protect Our Community Health." Reverend James Washington from Mount Olive Baptist Church, a patient of Dr. Brown's for 8 years, stood on the clinic's front steps, addressing the gathering through a megaphone. His voice boomed with the authority of a man who had led civil rights marches in the 1960s and wasn't about to back down from injustice now. Dr. Marcus Brown is not a criminal, he declared, his words met with shouts of agreement from the crowd. He is a healer. He is a servant of this community. When my diabetes got so bad, I couldn't afford insulin. Dr. Brown made sure I got my medication. When Mrs. Patterson's baby had pneumonia and the emergency room turned her away because she didn't have insurance, Dr. Brown saved that child's life. The crowd's energy was building, their voices growing louder as more people shared stories of Dr. Brown's compassion and dedication. Maria Gonzalez, a single mother of 3, stepped forward to take the megaphone. "My daughter Sophia has asthma," she said, her accented English thick with emotion. "When she had an attack last winter, and I had no money for her inhaler, Dr. Brown stayed late to treat her for free. He gave me medicine samples to last until I could get to the pharmacy. He saved my baby's life. This is not a drug dealer. This is an angel." Inside the clinic, Karen Mitchell's phone conversation had become increasingly agitated. Detective Santos positioned herself where she could observe the woman's behavior while continuing to document the scene. Through years of investigation experience, she had learned that guilty parties often revealed themselves through their actions after the initial crime, and Karen's conduct was textbook suspicious behavior. "I don't care what it costs," Karen was saying into her phone, her voice tight with panic. "I need damage control." This was supposed to be a simple harassment complaint, not a media circus. Detective Santos's eyebrows rose. Harassment complaint. The woman had just admitted that her 911 call wasn't based on genuine concern about criminal activity, but was intended to harass Dr. Brown. That was exactly the evidence needed to pursue charges for filing a false police report. Officer Johnson approached the detective with a concerned expression. "Ma'am, we've got a problem. The media's picked up on the story, and it's not looking good for the department. Social media is calling this racial profiling and questioning why a SWAT team was used against a medical clinic." Detective Santos looked out at the crowd, noting the mix of ages and ethnicities united in their support for Dr. Brown. This wasn't just about one doctor. It was about community trust in law enforcement, about the protection of essential services for vulnerable populations, about the deeper issues of gentrification and institutional racism that plagued urban communities across the country. "Get me the body cam footage from every officer involved in this operation," she instructed Officer Johnson. "I want to review everything that happened from the moment we received the complaint until now." Within an hour, Detective Santos was sitting in the police station's video review room, watching the raid unfold from multiple angles. The footage was damning. It showed tactical officers destroying a legitimate medical facility based on an unsubstantiated complaint from a woman whose demeanor and statements clearly suggested personal motivation rather than public safety concerns. But it was the audio that provided the most revealing evidence. The bodycam microphones had picked up Karen Mitchell's phone conversation, and the detective played it back multiple times to ensure she heard correctly. "The important thing is that his clinic is shut down." Karen's voice came through clearly. "I don't care if the charges stick, the damage to his reputation is done. No one will trust him after this. And that's all that matters." Detective Santos leaned back in her chair, processing the implications of what she had just heard. This wasn't just a false police report. This was a calculated attempt to destroy a man's career and livelihood out of personal spite. It was character assassination using law enforcement as the weapon. Her phone buzzed with a text message from her captain. "Media wants statement on clinic raid. What's the story?" Detective Santos typed back, "False report. Investigating the complainant for filing fraudulent 911 call. We'll have full report within 48 hours." Outside the police station, the protest had moved from the clinic to City Hall. Dr. Brown, despite his ordeal, had joined the demonstration, his presence lending dignity and gravitas to the crowd's demands for justice. He stood beside Reverend Washington on the City Hall steps, his medical coat still bearing stains from the morning's chaos. His voice steady as he addressed the growing crowd. "I didn't go to medical school to become rich or famous," Dr. Brown said. His words carried by the wind across the plaza, where hundreds of supporters had gathered. "I became a doctor to heal people. For 15 years, I've tried to provide quality health care to families who couldn't afford it anywhere else. Today, someone tried to destroy that mission with lies and manipulation." The crowd listened in rapt attention as he continued. "But I want you to know that I'm not giving up. This clinic serves a vital need in our community, and we're going to rebuild. We're going to restore every service, replace every piece of equipment, and continue caring for every patient who walks through our doors." Applause erupted from the crowd, but Dr. Brown raised his hand for silence. "However, I also want justice. Whoever made that false report needs to be held accountable, not just for what they did to me, but for what they did to every patient who couldn't get medical care today, every family who was frightened and confused, every child who saw their doctor treated like a criminal." Mayor Rebecca Thompson had been watching the demonstration from her office window, her political instincts telling her that this story could define her administration's relationship with the community. She was a pragmatic woman who understood that public perception often mattered more than actual facts, and the optics of a SWAT raid on a beloved community doctor were disastrous for everyone involved. She picked up her phone and dialed Detective Santos directly. "Detective, I need an update on the clinic situation. The media is calling this everything from police brutality to a hate crime." "Ma'am, I have strong evidence that this was a fraudulent complaint filed by someone with a personal grudge against Dr. Brown. I'm preparing charges against the complainant for filing a false police report, and I recommend the department issue a public apology to Dr. Brown and his staff." Mayor Thompson was quiet for a long moment, processing the political implications. "What kind of evidence?" Bodycam audio of the complainant admitting her goal was to damage Dr. Brown's reputation, regardless of whether criminal charges were filed. Clear evidence of retaliatory motivation stemming from a medical disagreement. Zero evidence of any actual criminal activity at the clinic. "Jesus Christ," the mayor muttered. "How did this get so far out of hand?" "Ma'am, with respect, someone called in a drug-dealing complaint against a medical clinic, and nobody thought to do basic verification before sending in SWAT. That's a systemic problem that goes beyond this individual case." Mayor Thompson ended the call and immediately convened an emergency meeting with the police chief, city attorney, and public relations director. Within 2 hours, she was standing at a podium in the City Hall press room, facing a crowd of reporters and community members who had followed the story throughout the day. "This afternoon, our police department executed what they believed was a legitimate drug investigation at Mercy Community Clinic," Mayor Thompson began, her voice carefully controlled. "However, our investigation has revealed that the complaint which triggered this operation was fraudulent, filed by an individual with personal grievances against Dr. Brown rather than genuine concerns about criminal activity." Murmurs rippled through the crowd as reporters scribbled notes and cameras recorded every word. The mayor continued, "Dr. Marcus Brown is a respected member of our medical community who has served our city with distinction for 15 years. The damage done to his clinic and his reputation today is unacceptable, and we are taking immediate steps to address this situation." "Will there be charges filed against the person who made the false report?" called out a reporter from the local newspaper. "That decision rests with our district attorney's office, but I can confirm that Detective Santos has recommended charges for filing a false police report. If those charges are filed and the defendant is convicted, they could face significant fines and possible jail time. Another reporter raised her hand. What about compensation for Dr. Brown? His clinic was destroyed. His patients were terrified, and his reputation has been damaged. What is the city prepared to do to make this right? Mayor Thompson had anticipated this question. The city will be working with Dr. Brown to ensure his clinic is fully restored and operational as quickly as possible. We're also reviewing our protocols for handling anonymous complaints to prevent similar incidents in the future. While the mayor faced reporters, Detective Santos was at Karen Mitchell's downtown office, accompanied by 2 uniformed officers and an arrest warrant signed by Judge Patricia Hayes. Mitchell Development Group occupied the top floor of a gleaming office building, its panoramic windows offering sweeping views of the city skyline. Karen Mitchell sat behind a massive mahogany desk, her earlier confidence replaced by the barely controlled panic of someone whose carefully constructed plans had collapsed spectacularly. Her attorney, a sharp-faced man in an expensive suit, flanked her as Detective Santos read the charges. Ms. Mitchell, you're under arrest for filing a false police report, a third-degree felony under state law. You have the right to remain silent. Anything you say can and will be used against you in a court of law. As the Miranda rights echoed through the office, Karen's mind raced through the events that had brought her to this moment. The headaches had been real, but they were caused by stress from her struggling business, not any serious medical condition. When Dr. Brown had refused to order expensive tests that might have supported a disability insurance claim, she had felt personally attacked. Her privileged worldview unable to accept that a doctor might actually prioritize medical ethics over customer service. The 911 call had been impulsive, made in a moment of rage after she had seen Dr. Brown's photo in the newspaper accepting a community service award. Watching him celebrated while her own business faced financial difficulties had triggered something dark and vindictive in her personality. She had convinced herself that she was performing a public service by exposing what she imagined must be corruption at the clinic. "I want to make a statement," Karen said suddenly, ignoring her attorney's sharp gesture for silence. Detective Santos paused the arrest procedure. "You understand that you've been read your rights. Anything you say can be used against you in court." Karen nodded, tears beginning to stream down her perfectly made-up face. "I never meant for anyone to get hurt. I was angry, and I made a terrible mistake. Dr. Brown didn't deserve what happened to him." Her attorney looked horrified. "Karen, stop talking. We need to discuss this privately before you make any statements." But Karen continued, the words pouring out as if a dam had burst inside her. "I wanted him to suffer like I thought he had made me suffer. But watching those officers destroy his clinic, seeing those scared patients, I realized I had become something I never thought I could be. I became the kind of person who would destroy an innocent man's life out of spite." Detective Santos documented every word, knowing that this confession would make the prosecution's case incredibly strong. But beyond the legal implications, she found herself studying Karen Mitchell's face, trying to understand the mindset that could lead someone to weaponize law enforcement against an innocent person. The drive back to the police station took them past Mercy Community Clinic, where volunteers from throughout the community had gathered to help clean up the damage. Dr. Brown was there, his sleeves rolled up, working alongside patients and neighbors to restore order to his medical practice. Patricia Williams directed the effort to reorganize medical supplies while maintaining proper sterile procedures, her nursing expertise invaluable in the restoration process. Mrs. Chen had returned with her granddaughter and a thermos of hot tea for the volunteers. Despite her advanced age and the trauma she had experienced that morning, she insisted on helping to clean, her gnarled hands carefully sorting through scattered patient files, with the same meticulous attention she had once applied to her work as a seamstress. "Dr. Brown saved my husband's life," she told anyone who would listen. Her English heavily accented, but her message crystal clear. "Heart attack, 5 years ago. Hospital said too expensive. Insurance said too old. Dr. Brown treated him for free. Followed up every week until he was strong again. This is good man. Someone tried to hurt good man." The story spread through social media with remarkable speed, transforming from a local news incident into a national conversation about healthcare access, racial justice, and the abuse of emergency services. Justice for Dr. Brown began trending on Twitter, with medical professionals across the country sharing their own stories of serving underserved communities and facing various forms of discrimination and harassment. Dr. Jennifer Martinez, an emergency room physician in Los Angeles, tweeted, "I've had patients question my competence based on my accent and appearance." Dr. Brown's experience reminds us that bias in healthcare isn't just about patients discriminating against providers. Sometimes it's used as a weapon against those who serve vulnerable populations. The American Medical Association issued a statement condemning the false accusation and praising Dr. Brown's commitment to community health. Medical schools began using the incident as a case study in healthcare equity and professional ethics. What had begun as one woman's vindictive phone call had evolved into a teachable moment about institutional racism, healthcare access, and community solidarity. 3 days after the raid, Mercy Community Clinic reopened its doors. The waiting room had been restored, the medical equipment recalibrated, and the patient files reorganized. But more than just physical repairs had taken place. The community response to the crisis had strengthened bonds between Dr. Brown and his patients, creating a support network that was more robust than ever before. The first patient through the door was Mrs. Rodriguez, whose diabetes management had been interrupted by the clinic's closure. She carried a manila folder filled with petition signatures from community members demanding that Karen Mitchell face the full consequences of her actions. "Doctor, we collected over 3,000 signatures," she said, her voice filled with pride. "People who you've treated, people who know your character, people who won't let someone destroy what you've built here." Dr. Brown accepted the petition with deep emotion, understanding that it represented more than just names on paper. It was validation of his life's work, proof that his commitment to serving others had created lasting relationships based on trust and mutual respect. As the morning progressed, a steady stream of patients filled the waiting room. Some had medical appointments, but others came simply to offer support and share their stories. The elderly veteran who hadn't been charged for his blood pressure medications during a difficult financial period. The teenage mother who had received prenatal care without judgment or condescension. The immigrant family who had been treated with dignity and respect despite language barriers and immigration status fears. Each story reinforced the same theme. Dr. Brown was not just a healthcare provider, but a pillar of community strength, someone who had chosen to practice medicine as a form of social justice rather than merely a profession. The legal proceedings against Karen Mitchell moved forward swiftly. Her confession, combined with the bodycam evidence and testimony from clinic staff, created an overwhelming case for the prosecution. District Attorney Sarah Chen, herself a daughter of immigrants who had relied on community health centers, pursued the charges with particular determination. "This case isn't just about one false police report," DA Chen explained to reporters. "It's about the abuse of emergency services, the weaponization of law enforcement against innocent people, and the deliberate attempt to damage essential community services. We will prosecute to the full extent of the law." Karen Mitchell's defense attorney attempted to negotiate a plea bargain, arguing that his client's remorse and cooperation should result in reduced charges. But the community impact of her actions made lenient treatment politically impossible. The false report had not only damaged Dr. Brown personally, but had disrupted healthcare services for hundreds of patients who depended on the clinic. The preliminary hearing drew protesters from both sides of the political spectrum. Supporters of Dr. Brown filled the courthouse steps with signs demanding justice and accountability. A smaller group of Karen Mitchell's friends and business associates argued for mercy, claiming that her actions were an aberration caused by stress and mental health issues. Dr. Brown attended the hearing, sitting quietly in the gallery as prosecutors presented evidence of the damage caused by Mitchell's false accusation. The financial cost to the clinic, estimated at over $50,000 in equipment damage and lost revenue, was significant. But the human cost was immeasurable: patients who had missed critical medical appointments, staff members who had been traumatized by the raid, community trust in law enforcement that had been severely damaged. When given the opportunity to address the court, Dr. Brown spoke with characteristic dignity and restraint. "Your Honor, I don't seek revenge against Ms. Mitchell, but I do seek accountability. The false accusation she made could have ended my career and destroyed a medical practice that serves families who have nowhere else to turn for health care." He paused, looking directly at Karen Mitchell for the first time since her arrest. "I hope that whatever sentence you impose helps her understand the real-world consequences of her actions. When you attack a community health center, you're not just attacking one doctor, you're attacking the health and welfare of entire families." Judge Patricia Hayes, a veteran jurist known for her thoughtful approach to sentencing, listened carefully to all testimony before rendering her decision. "Ms. Mitchell, your actions represent a serious abuse of public resources and a deliberate attempt to harm an innocent person's reputation and livelihood. The evidence shows that you filed a false police report knowing it was untrue, motivated by personal anger rather than any legitimate public safety concern." Karen Mitchell stood as the judge continued. "However, the court also notes your cooperation with investigators and your apparent remorse for the harm you caused. Therefore, I sentence you to 18 months in prison, with the possibility of early release after 1 year, contingent on completion of community service requirements and restitution payments to Dr. Brown and the clinic." The sentence was more severe than Karen's attorney had hoped for, but less than what many community members had demanded. It sent a clear message that false accusations against public servants would be taken seriously by the legal system, while still allowing for the possibility of redemption through community service. As Karen was led away in handcuffs, Dr. Brown felt no satisfaction in her punishment. A healer by nature and training, he understood that justice and revenge were different concepts, and that true healing required forgiveness rather than retribution. The weeks following the trial brought unexpected opportunities for Dr. Brown and his clinic. The national attention had attracted support from medical organizations, charitable foundations, and individual donors who wanted to ensure that community health centers could continue their vital work without fear of harassment or false accusations. A consortium of medical schools established the Dr. Marcus Brown Community Health Fellowship, providing funding for medical students to work in underserved communities during their training. The program's goal was to encourage more healthcare providers to choose community medicine over more lucrative specialties. The American Academy of Family Physicians created new protocols for supporting physicians who faced false accusations or harassment related to their community service work. Dr. Brown was invited to serve on the committee developing these guidelines, his experience providing valuable insights into the challenges faced by doctors who choose to serve vulnerable populations. Most importantly, the incident had strengthened the relationship between Dr. Brown and his community. Patients who had taken his services for granted now understood how precious and fragile healthcare access could be. They organized regular fundraising events, volunteer programs, and advocacy efforts to ensure the clinic's long-term sustainability. Mrs. Chen, despite her age and limited English, became one of the clinic's most effective advocates. She organized the other elderly patients into a phone tree system that could mobilize community support quickly if any similar threats emerged. Her granddaughter helped translate her advocacy efforts into social media campaigns that kept the clinic's mission visible to younger community members. Patricia Williams, the head nurse, used the experience to pursue additional training in crisis management and community organizing. She recognized that healthcare providers in underserved areas needed to be prepared for more than just medical emergencies. They also needed skills to navigate political and social challenges that could threaten their ability to serve patients. 6 months after the raid, Dr. Brown stood in his rebuilt clinic, looking at the walls that now displayed not just medical diplomas and patient thank you notes, but also photographs from the community support rallies and newspaper articles about the fellowship program established in his honor. The physical damage had been repaired, but the deeper impact of the experience would shape his practice for years to come. A soft knock on his office door interrupted his reflection. Mrs. Rodriguez entered, carrying her usual manila folder, but this time it contained something different than petition signatures. Doctor, my daughter Sophia wants to be a doctor because of you, she said, her voice thick with emotion. She's been accepted to the pre-med program at the state university. She says she wants to serve communities like this one, the way you taught her that doctors should serve. Dr. Brown felt tears gather in his eyes as he looked at the acceptance letter Sophia had earned through her own hard work. Inspired by the example of compassionate healthcare she had witnessed throughout her childhood. This was the real victory, not Karen Mitchell's punishment, but Sophia Rodriguez's future as a physician committed to serving others. The late afternoon sun streamed through the clinic's windows, casting long shadows across the waiting room where patients sat reading magazines and children played quietly with toys. The sounds were ordinary conversations in multiple languages, the rustle of paperwork, the gentle hum of medical equipment. But they represented something extraordinary, a community health center that had survived an attempt to destroy it and emerged stronger than before. As Dr. Brown prepared for his evening rounds, checking on elderly patients who couldn't easily travel to the clinic, he reflected on the lessons learned from his ordeal. The experience had taught him that justice was not just about punishing wrongdoing, but about building systems and relationships strong enough to withstand future attacks. Karen Mitchell would serve her sentence and hopefully learn from her mistakes. The police department had implemented new protocols for investigating anonymous complaints against licensed professionals. The city had established oversight procedures to prevent similar incidents in the future. But, most importantly, a community had come together to defend something they valued: accessible healthcare provided with dignity and respect. In an era when healthcare was increasingly seen as a commodity rather than a human right, Dr. Brown's clinic stood as proof that another approach was possible. As darkness fell over the neighborhood, lights glowed warmly in the windows of Mercy Community Clinic. Inside, Dr. Brown finished his notes on the day's patients, each file representing a life touched by compassionate care. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new patients, new opportunities to heal and serve. The false accusation that had threatened to destroy his life's work had instead strengthened it, creating bonds of trust and support that would endure long after the headlines faded. In the end, the truth had prevailed, justice had been served, and a community had learned the power of standing together against injustice. Dr. Marcus Brown turned off the clinic lights and locked the door, knowing that he would return tomorrow to continue the work he had chosen 3 decades ago, healing bodies, strengthening communities, and proving that one person's commitment to serving others could make a lasting difference in the world. The street outside was quiet now, but the impact of what had happened here would ripple outward for years to come, inspiring other healthcare providers to serve with courage, encouraging communities to protect their essential services, and reminding everyone that the fight for justice is never finished, but always worth continuing.